Across the Great Lakes, Plains, Southwest, and Pacific Northwest, different indigenous traditions describe a thunderbird tied to storm power, protection, and warning. Not a verified animal, not a lab-confirmed species, but a named sky figure with wings big enough to carry thunder, lightning, fear, and memory all at once. That is the first evidence payoff. The strongest clue is not a body. It is the repeated cultural image. Some versions describe it as a protector, some as a warning, some as a force that lives above the storms. And that is why the Thunderbird still pulls millions of views. It is not just a creature story. It is a story about power, weather, identity, and the way a symbol can outgrow the evidence behind it. Thunderbird legends do not belong to one single place. They appear in different forms across multiple indigenous traditions, including stories from the Great Lakes, the Plains, the Southwest, and the Pacific Northwest. That matters because the Thunderbird is not just a modern internet cryptid. It is a cultural figure with deep regional meaning. In some traditions, it controls storms. In others, it fights powerful underworld creatures. In others, it marks a moral boundary between human behavior and the forces of the natural world. So when people reduce the Thunderbird to a blurry photo or a monster headline, they miss the deeper story immediately. The most powerful clue in Thunderbird lore is not a bone or a body. It is the image. A giant bird shape cutting across clouds, wings stretched wider than a house. A silhouette that feels too large for the horizon. That image survives because it is simple enough to remember and dramatic enough to spread. Once a story gives weather a face, it becomes easy to repeat and hard to kill. And that is exactly what happened here. The Thunderbird became a symbol people could place on cliffs, in storms, on flags, in art, and eventually in popular culture. The Thunderbird story spread because it can do many jobs at once. It can explain thunder. It can mark sacred power. It can warn people to respect the sky and the land. And it can become a visual shorthand for strength. That flexibility is the secret. Stories that survive centuries usually do more than entertain. They organize feeling. They give a community a shape for something bigger than an animal. And once the Thunderbird started doing that work, it could travel into new settings without losing its force. Modern searches for the Thunderbird usually begin with curiosity and end with misidentification. Large birds. Weather illusions. Stories passed down out of context. And sometimes, straight-up sensationalism. That does not mean every Thunderbird report is nonsense. It means the evidence rarely stays clean long enough to turn legend into zoology. The moment the camera comes out, the weather changes. The moment the story gets shared, the details shift. And the more people want the Thunderbird to be real, the more the legend gets pulled away from the place where it began. The rational explanation starts with ordinary things doing unusual work. Eagles, vultures, condors, weather systems, distance, and the human brain, which is very good at turning a partial sighting into a complete creature. A bird seen from below can look far larger than it really is. A shadow can stretch across a ridge and become a myth in one glance. A lightning storm can make the sky feel inhabited. That does not erase the cultural meaning of Thunderbird stories. It simply shows how easy it is for a giant sky figure to emerge from real observation plus a deeply symbolic imagination. Thunderbird legends feel real because the world they describe feels real. Storms are real. Lightning is real. Huge birds are real. And fear is real. That combination makes the myth hard to separate from lived experience. If a story says the sky itself is alive, every thunderstorm becomes a piece of evidence. If a story says a great bird guards the land, every sudden gust feels like a reminder. That is why the Thunderbird survives where simpler creatures fade. It is built into the emotional weather of the place. If the Thunderbird were a literal species, what would proof look like? Nests, bones, DNA, a chain of consistent sightings that survived skepticism. But the Thunderbird usually arrives as art, oral history, ritual symbol, or a story attached to weather and place. That is a different kind of truth. It is not zoological. It is cultural. And that is why the usual proof standards miss the point unless they also ask what the legend is doing for the people who tell it. The Thunderbird is stronger than a single footprint, because it was never built to live on one piece of evidence. It lives in repeated telling. In symbols. In weather. In place. Modern culture kept the Thunderbird alive by turning it into a visual shorthand. Artwork, sports logos, mascots, comics, aircraft names. That is not a mistake. It is evidence of how quickly a myth becomes portable once it has a strong shape. The Thunderbird works because it can be borrowed without needing to be explained every time. That portability is part of the danger and part of the magic. Once a symbol can travel that easily, it starts to lose one meaning and gain 10 others. It can become a school mascot, a comic book idea, a product name, a piece of nostalgia. And every new use makes it easier to recognize. Even if the original context gets thinner, sightings fade, photos get disputed, stories change, but the legend keeps going because it is bigger than any single report. A creature might need proof. A symbol does not. That is the difference that matters here. The Thunderbird outlives the sightings because it was never only a sighting in the first place. It was already a story about order, storm, and power before anyone pointed a camera at the sky. The scarier explanation is that the Thunderbird does not need to be biologically real to be powerful. It may be a cultural machine for turning storm, memory, and moral order into a single unforgettable image. That version is less cinematic than a monster bird in the clouds. But it is more interesting, because it means the Thunderbird survives not by hiding from science, but by living in a different category altogether. It is a legend, a symbol, and a kind of atmospheric language. And those things can be more durable than any creature. So what is the Thunderbird, really? The safest answer is that it is a powerful symbol rooted in indigenous storytelling traditions, later borrowed, simplified, and amplified by modern culture. It can appear as a storm maker, a protector, a warning, or a giant bird that lives where weather and wonder meet. That is why the legend lasts. Not because it has been verified as an animal, because it works as a shape for all. And awe, once it catches on, can fly farther than facts alone. That is why Thunderbird Legends still pulls so many views. They are not trying to be biology. They are trying to give the sky a story. If the Thunderbird made you think differently about sky legends, stay with the Mystery Atlas TV. We keep following the places where folklore, weather, and memory overlap. Subscribe for the next investigation, and tell me whether you think the Thunderbird is a creature, a symbol, or both at the same time. Because the next time thunder rolls, the story may return with it. And in some places, it already has. That is how legends behave when they fit the weather too well. They keep returning. Keep watching. The sky remembers what people keep naming. Evidence check. Thunderbird stories should not be flattened into a simple monster hunt. The stronger approach separates cultural meaning, eyewitness claims, misidentification, and the real history of large birds. Some reports may be exaggeration. Some may come from condors, cranes, eagles, or memories shaped by fear. But the persistence of the story still matters. A useful investigation asks what each account is actually claiming, where it happened, who recorded it, and whether the description fits any known animal. That keeps the legend respectful without pretending that every dramatic version is proven.